Hi all, welcome back to Triple Goddess Soapery. My name is Angela, and today we're going to do a complete tutorial on how to make soap. Now, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to find a recipe. On the screen is the very basic recipe, the very first recipe that I ever used as a soap maker with easy to source ingredients. Now that you have a recipe, you're going to want to gather your equipment and your PPE so that you can make soap. And on the screen, you're going to see the basics that you probably are going to want to have. You're going to want to have number 2 or number 5 plastic for your sodium hydroxide as well as your soap making. You can also use stainless steel, but you don't want to use aluminum because it will react. And you also don't want to use glass because it can become weak and it can shatter. Otherwise, you're going to want vessels for measuring. You're going to want a soap mold of some kind, a scale, gloves, and immersion blender spatulas, protective eyewear, and I also have a laser thermometer there in the front. So once you have all that, you are ready to make soap. And I will list all of these things down below so that you can reference them there. All right, now that we have everything gathered, we are going to put our PPE on because life safety is probably the most important thing that I can teach you. You want to wear your long sleeves, your long pants, your closed-toed shoes, your gloves, your goggles, and I also have a face shield that I use just in case anything splashes. Sodium hydroxide is very caustic, it's alkaline, and it can cause life-changing chemical burns as well as blindness if it were to get in your eye. So you really need to treat it with respect and wear your PPE. I also highly recommend putting the kids to bed or putting the pets away, working in a space where you can be completely free of distractions and keep everyone safe because it is called an accident for a reason. You're also going to want to work in a well-ventilated space, either next to an open window or, with a fan running. I have an exhaust fan in my soap studio. To make the lye solution, you're going to want to measure out your water in your lye safe container. Then in a separate container, you're going to want to measure out your sodium hydroxide. You never want to measure your sodium hydroxide, which is also called lye. I use those terms interchangeably, directly into the water because, and you'll see, or you will have seen, that when I'm measuring out my sodium hydroxide, a big chunk falls out. Not only will that cause splashes, but it also means that you've probably overpoured, and now that sodium hydroxide solution needs to go down the sink. Unless you're going to do some, math and figure it out and like bulk it up, but then you're going to have too much and you're going to want to save it for later, and it just becomes a whole thing. So, for safety reasons and just as good practice, measure your water, measure out your sodium hydroxide solutions or your sodium hydroxide separate, and then pour your sodium hydroxide into the water. You never want to do it the other way around because you could cause a volcano, stuff could bubble up, and it'll just be very dangerous. So always sodium hydroxide into the water, never the other way around. Once you pour your sodium hydroxide into the water, you're going to want to stir it up very carefully, and you're going to keep stirring until it's clear. You will notice very strong fumes, and you will want to, I personally use a ventilator, which I have for other purposes, but I use a ventilator, and I work either under my exhaust fan or by an open window because the fumes are very toxic and they will hurt your lungs. You could alternatively, instead of using water, you could use ice cubes, and you just pour your sodium hydroxide onto the ice cubes slowly and keep stirring until it melts, and that does cut down on fumes, and it also keeps the sodium hydroxide solution a lot cooler because sodium hydroxide solution can get up to 180 to 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Another reason why you need to be very safe and very careful around sodium hydroxide because it just gets really hot. So, once your sodium hydroxide solution is made, you can stick it in the corner, covered preferably in a container that is spill proof until it's cooled down. I usually leave mine overnight or for weeks even before I use it. While that's cooling, then you can mix your oils and your butters. I like to measure my hard oils and butters into the container that I'm going to be making the soap in. And then once they're measured out, I put it in my microwave in short bursts until they're melted. If you don't want to use a microwave, that's fine. You can use a double boiler, whatever works for you. Once they're melted, then I measure out my liquid oils into that container and we're good to go. Now, as far as temperature goes, I like to soap at room temperature, which is anywhere from 65 to 85 degrees, depending on the time of year. You do not need your lye solution and your oils and butters to be within 10 degrees of each other. That's completely unnecessary. However, you do want to soap not so hot that you're going to cause yourself problems. Because the hotter you soap at, the more likely you will face issues like acceleration. So for me personally, I do not soap at 120 degrees, and I have never soaped at 120 degrees except for that very first time. And then I learned better that it wasn't necessary. So these days, my sodium hydroxide solution is probably at around 70 degrees, and my oils and butters are probably more like anywhere from 75 to 90 degrees, sometimes even a little hotter. So, we've got our lye solution ready, we've got our oils and butters ready, everything's at the temperature that we like to soap at, and we are ready to go. All right, now that we have everything ready to go, the next thing we want to do is be prepared. So, I like to measure out all of my fragrance, any additives, any colorants, get all my containers ready, my mold, my immersion blender, everything. I like to lay everything out and get everything ready. Now, with the soap I'm making today, I'm using mica and I'm also using titanium dioxide. So, from my soap, oils, and butters, I take out a tablespoon and I put that into a container and then I add the mica colorant that I'm going to use and I stir that up. It just makes it a lot easier to blend up the soap afterwards and not have to worry about speckles and spots and having it not blended properly. I also use a water-based titanium dioxide, and I completely do it wrong here and I put it in with my oil. But because I use a water-based titanium dioxide, a water soluble, I will just put, a tablespoon or so of titanium dioxide into my water or vice versa, and it just blends really well. And then I add that to the portion of the soap batter that I want to make white. And actually, I misspoke. I actually do want titanium dioxide in that first container because basically this soap is going to be a two-tone purple and then white. And this is my Sunshine Coast lavender, so it is going to be a purple soap. So yeah, so we're going to get our three separate colors measured out, and we're going to mix them up with oil or water respectively, and then we're going to set them aside. We've also are going to do the same thing with our fragrance. I'm using lavender essential oil today, so we're going to measure that out in a separate container and set that aside. And then in the back behind the bucket, you can see that's where my mold is, and that's sitting there. And one tip that I've learned is that if you set your fragrance inside of your mold, you won't forget to add it later because that does happen. It happens a lot actually. So yeah. So that is another tip, something that I recommend. And there you go. You can see the titanium dioxide. It blends so smoothly and so easily when you use the water soluble. And we're just going to stir up this first purple. This is purple and a little bit of titanium dioxide, and the other one just has the purple. And there we go. That's what they look like, just a little different. We just want them to be two different shades so that it's obvious when you're looking at the soap that there's two different colors, but not too drastic. And I actually really, really love the way this soap came out, and you will see it at the end. All right, so We are using lavender essential oil, so we're going to get that measured out because, like I said, I like to get everything as prepared as possible just in case it hits the fan. And I actually use this soap as my example for this video because things go wrong. And I want to show you that even though things go wrong and maybe you're panicking, it's okay. This soap turns out absolutely beautiful and has gotten just raved about on social media. So even though multiple things went wrong, things that were under my control and that I knew better, my soap still turned out beautiful. Anyway, so I'm using a stick blender here that I don't normally use, and this is one of the problems that I had. The stick blender is just a little too powerful for what I'm doing. Oh, and like I said, I like to be prepared, so I have my additives. I add my additives to the oils and I blend them up really well. That way I can mix as much as I want and I don't have to worry about accelerating the batter. So I use kaolin clay and goat's milk powder, so that's in there. And we're just going to blend it up really, really well with my super powerful blender that I knew better and shouldn't have used. And when I'm happy with this, then we'll be ready to pour in the sodium hydroxide solution and start making soap. And here we go with my snap lid container. I've also written danger lie on the side of it, just so that people know what it is and they're careful. We're just going to slowly pour that in, trying to avoid air bubbles, although air bubbles are not the end of the world. And I like to immediately put the container in the sink and run some cold water in it, just to, dilute any drops that happen to be left. And we are ready to go. Now we're on the path to making soap. And all we're gonna do is blend this up, and we're just gonna mute that. So we're just gonna blend this up until we get to a light trace. And that means that when you lift the stick blender out and you drip the batter back down into the bowl, you're gonna see it tracing a pattern. And you also want to check and make sure that there's no separation happening. If you look at your stick blender, you should be able to tell quickly if there's oils and the waters are separating. And I just like to stick blend and also use my spatula at the same time, just making sure everything is getting mixed properly. Now, like I said, I did make some mistakes with this and I want to point them out. So this blender only has one setting and it's just super fast and that was a problem. It's not my preferred blender, although it is a very cheap blender and if that's all you've got, you should use it. So I'm happy with that. Now the second mistake that I made is that I'm adding my fragrance now. Now, lavender essential oil is a floral, and florals are notorious for accelerating soap batter. And what I should have done is I should have saved it for last, and then I should have hand mixed it in with my spatula and then carried on. So what happens is instead, I put my essential oil in my 3 buckets, and then I blended it again with my super fast blender, which is a mistake. So here I am just hand blending it in. Into my white, or well, I haven't put the white in yet, but I'm hand blending it in, which was kind of dumb that I put it in first, but whatever. You live and learn, right? And you can learn from my mistakes. So I'm just dividing out some of my soap batter now into the 2 different colors that I want to use, and then I'm going to add the white titanium hydroxide and water to the main batch. And that's the third problem, because titanium dioxide is also known to accelerate soap batter, which for the type of pour I'm going to do is great. It's perfect. But because I've had these other 2 issues as well, it's just a hot mess. So we've got the titanium dioxide into our batter and we're going to mix that in. And you're going to see things get really thick really fast. Now, one thing to note with titanium dioxide, it really does need to be mechanically dispersed into your soap batter, which means you really do need to use a stick blender. Using your spatula or a whisk just isn't enough to properly disperse titanium dioxide into your soap batter. That is based on my own experience, but it's also based on watching many, many other soap makers hand mix titanium dioxide and it not working out that well. All right, so I'm also blending in my colors in order of darkness. So I started with the white, the light purple, and then the dark purple. This just, this is just a cosmetic or an aesthetic thing that it's just makes it easier. I don't have to clean off the blender too much in between everything, and I'm not worried about um, mixing my colors, especially if I were to have like three or four different colors and not just shades of purple, then it would make a bigger difference. But that's just something else, it's just one of those be prepared things, do things in order, be efficient. So here we go, and I'm looking at it going, eesh, this is getting thick. So yeah, definitely a mistake on my part. I will say though, I'm doing an in the pot swirl with this particular soap, and having a thicker batter makes a much more beautiful soap, in my opinion. If you're doing an in the pot swirl, you want your batter to be thicker. This is a little thick though, it's a little too thick, but it comes out beautifully, so I don't know, maybe it's okay. So I'm just giving it a little stir. Sometimes when you stir your soap batter, it loosens it up a little bit. And I'm just holding it up as high as possible, trying to drop that purple down as low as I can get it in the white. And if the soap batter was a little more fluid, that would have worked a lot better. So we're just gonna get our two different colors in, and of course I'm gonna scrape the containers to within an inch of their lives because no soap batter left behind. And now we're gonna get the dark in, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna lift it up high and try and get as much of it in there as possible and not waste too much time because the clock is a ticking. Also, too, if you have any questions, please drop them below if I don't explain something. All right, so with this, I'm just giving it a stir, trying to get some of that purple down a little bit lower and mix it up a little bit without muddying the colors. And because the colors are so thick, it actually doesn't muddy at all. It's beautiful. And this is when we start to make a mess. So I'm ready to go. I'm gonna pour this in, but it's so thick it just kind of glops in. It barely pours. And you can see in the bucket how there's so much white there that it just didn't mix in that well. And we dropped a big plop on the table. Now, one thing you can do, you're gonna want to, especially when your soap is this thick, to try and prevent like really big air bubbles and holes in your soap. You're gonna want to bang the mold down as hard as you can on the counter or on the floor, just to, level that soap out, get it to fill up all the nooks and crannies, and just, have an aesthetically pleasing soap. That's the only reason to do it. I mean, So here I am picking it up. I don't know, I probably picked this up 4 or 5 inches and dropped it back down. I'll wipe up some of my mess here. Also, too, if you spill soap between your mold and the silicone, that soap is going to act like glue, and you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get that silicone mold out of the wooden box. So, if you do spill soap, try and clean it up as best you can because it will be a giant pain the next day trying to get that mold out. I know from experience. All right, so we're just gonna scrape this bucket out as much as we can because we don't want to waste any soap. And then we're just gonna give this another bang down. And then once it's all banged down, then we can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. And You can be done at this point, or you can decorate the top. And because I'm a little extra, I definitely decorate the top. I play with it a little bit with I think with a spatula. I think we'll see. We'll see what I do. But there's all kinds of different ways that you can play with the top of your soap. You can, use a spatula. You can use chopsticks. You can do anything basically. Now, because this is an in the pot swirl, I don't do any like hanger swirls or anything else fancy inside, but you can. I'm just gonna clean up my edges a little bit. Again, this is just an aesthetic thing for when the soap is, completely saponified. All right, so I'm done with that. And smash it around a few more times. And then I'm gonna clean up my edges because that's what I like to do. I also like to clean as I go. I don't know, like it just makes things easier. It saves me from sticking a bare hand in some soap that I didn't realize was there. All right, so yeah, I get out one of my spatulas here. Now this is one of the soaps that's been rebranded, and I'll be selling this soap wholesale as well as retail. So I'm keeping it kind of low top a little bit. Oh, also too, I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning, but the recipe that I show you is for 1,000 grams of soap, and 1,000 grams will fill these Amazon molds perfectly. And you shouldn't have any waste, and it shouldn't be short. It should be just perfect. So yeah, as a little aside. So I'm just gonna, you know, so back to what I was saying. The reason I was saying this is wholesale is because these bars are going to be a little shorter and squatter than my regular bars. So they're going to be about 3 inch wide by about 2.5 inches tall and about an inch and a quarter thick. So probably curing out to be about 150 grams. And I basically get 8 bars from this. Normally, my full size, if I were to just do it how I normally do, I would get 10 bars, but I'm going to get 8 bars out of this. All right. And we're going to finish her off with a little bit of plant-based biodegradable eco glitter. This glitter comes from I always forget. It'll be listed. It'll be down below in the description. So we're just going to sprinkle this on. Now you can use, a brush to kind of tap it on, dip the brush in the glitter and then tap it on like I'm doing here. Or what you can use your fingers and sprinkle. I'm just using a spoon. It really depends on what your aesthetic is and how steady your hand is and how picky you are. And then once I get that on, all I'm going to do is give her a little spritz with some White Diamonds mica. It's absolutely beautiful. White Diamonds mica is like one of my favorite things, I think. And then this, now the basically the final step is I spray my tops of my soap to help prevent soda ash, which is completely aesthetic. It's just a cosmetic thing, and I use 99% rubbing alcohol. And then I take my soap mold and I put it inside an old Amazon box, and then I close the box and throw a towel on top, and I just leave it for 24 hours. That's all I do, and I get complete gel every time. Now, getting a complete gel is again completely aesthetic and cosmetic. You don't need to do it, but it really does help your colors pop, and I like it. So, here we are. We have our absolutely gorgeous bar of soap. Isn't she beautiful? I was so, so, so pleased with how the two-tone color came out, how the swirls came out, just everything. Everything about this soap I am completely in love with. Now, I'm not 100% in love with the fragrance because I'm not a giant lavender fan, but these bars are absolutely gorgeous and they make me so happy. Now, I am using my single bar cutter, like I said, because these bars are going to be shorter and fatter than my normal bars. This cutter I did buy on Amazon. It was, I don't know, 50 or $80. I'm pretty sure there's an even better one on there right now that's in Canadian is about 60 bucks. And in the background there, I'm just measuring the bar just to confirm how big it is. But yeah, so you can buy a cutter. You don't even need a cutter. You can literally use a kitchen knife to cut your soap. You do not need fancy tools and equipment. For the mold, you don't need soap molds. You can use a milk carton and just, use a binder clip or something on the end just to make sure there's no leaks and just like cut out the side of it and use that, and then you can just peel it away when your soap is done and throw the carton in the garbage. You do not need expensive tools. The only thing I recommend is definitely go for your number 5 polypropylene containers, and they can be, used buckets. They don't have to be purchased from the store. They can be just an old bucket that you have laying around that's clean. um the only thing you really, really need to probably go buy is a scale, and then you can also use a kitchen scale, and you're probably going to need to buy an immersion blender. Look, isn't that absolutely gorgeous? So yeah, soap making doesn't have to be expensive, and I actually recommend start small. Don't go out and buy all the gadgets and tools and all of the different ingredients. You don't need it. You don't need it. Anyway, I have been rambling on long enough. Now, the last thing you're going to want to do is once your soap is cut, you're going to want to leave it somewhere where it can stay clean and dry to cure for at least 4 to 6 weeks so that all the water content evaporates and the crystalline structure inside the bar has a chance to form, condense, and give you a nice, hard, gentle, beautiful bar of soap. And that's it. You've made soap. So if you have made it this far, I am proud of you. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope that you've learned something of value. And if you have any questions, leave them below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I very, very much appreciate you. And I will be back soon with more soapy content.